Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of From the Field Tweet Show. My name is Natalia, and together with Casey, we are your hosts for the day. We're going to continue our conversation from the last time, so we're going to talk about data today. And we have a very special guest, Rick, who's a specialist solution architect, joining us today to discuss data strategy and trends in Australia and New Zealand. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you.
Can you please tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Rick Fraser, and I'm an architect in our specialist data and AI team. So I have the privilege of working with a lot of our customers to help them use data analytics AI to drive their business forward, which is really exciting.
Awesome. Before we dive deeper into conversation with you and get all your knowledge, we think about starting with a quick overview of what's new in data analytics on AWS. In a recent show, Connect team make an excellent point. It's extremely hard to keep up with all the news and announcements. So we decided that would be a good thing to cover it briefly today. Over to you, Casey.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Natalia. So let me just pop up my screen. So the very first part is we do have a whole entire page that's really dedicated to going through like what is new. And they also go down to a level of like the service grouping. So right now, like since we are talking about data and data analytics tend to go together, I thought it'd be good just to highlight, the analytics what's new page. And then at the same time, as you mentioned, to just go through a couple of like the last, features and service announcements that came out in the last February, pretty much, just to, just go over them, see what's there and see what's happening. And now obviously it just won't go forward. There we go. Yay. PowerPoint win. The first one is data sharing in the enterprise world has very much become like a very relevant conversation that we've been having. A lot of businesses, have already developed a data strategy. They got a mature data lake or data warehouse in action, and they're wanting to share that out to their customers or to the wider businesses, and also recoup some of those costs. Rick, have you actually seen anything like that in the wild?
Yes, I'm actually seeing a lot of that. A lot of data sharing. It is a trend that's continuing to grow momentum, and I think what's behind that is that a lot of customers have realized that they've got a huge repository of rich information that is useful for their own internal purposes, but in many cases it's also useful for other people potentially outside of their organization, or just maybe other teams inside their organization. And so if you think about, take an example of, let's say you're a retail customer and you have a lot of data points on customer transactions and returns of products and these kinds of things. That kind of information is probably going to be really useful to a product management team as well. They might get new insights about their products that they can use to drive back into their activities. And so it only makes sense to share data as widely as possible, so long as there's an opportunity to deliver more value out of that same data. And when you think about that, you invest this time and energy into building out your data models. Sharing that more widely to capture more value out of it is a great way to improve return on investment. So this is becoming more common, and I think I guess one of the drivers behind that is, if you think about the way that data platforms used to look, they were probably a big monolith, quite rigid. And so the hesitation from data teams has always been, we have to have some controls over, what we share and what kind of computational resources are available to you as a user. Because if we don't do that, then we have these noisy neighbors issues where what you're doing might impact what we're trying to do.
Yep. Awesome. Just so we don't get too bogged down into details. What this essentially means is that rather than having to grant access to each individual object within the Redshift cluster, you can now grant those scopes to users and roles, and then give those out to the customers and whatnot. And obviously, I keep accidentally clicking off the presentation, which makes it very hard to continue. And this one is similar, where for materialized views, generally those are the views that we want to actually present out, because that is the amalgamation of the data presented in a way that is actually of some value. And what this does is allows quicker execution of those updates, because in the background it'll work out what the change in updates are to the underlying tables, and then only apply those changes. So that is a welcome change. The one that I always put in was around security, because like, we always forget about VPC endpoints, because it's one of those things where our infrastructure teams will set up once and then we always forget about it, because, you know, it just works. But it's always good to recognize when our services, because we are expanding them, especially with like our serverless capabilities, that as the VPC endpoints come online, that we do make sure that we revisit our infrastructure and security teams and go, hey, you know, we should actually be making sure we're using this new capability. So that's why I put that there, even though it's not essentially the most sexiest of updates. The one really cool one here is the DynamoDB 0 ETL integration to Redshift, which is only available in US East 1 right now. This is cool because I do see a lot of businesses wanting to do BI or some type of analytics over the data they have in DynamoDB, but NoSQL and analytics and BI don't really marry together too well. So I thought this was cool that there's you know, active change to actually try to reduce that that friction. Rick, in terms of your experience, do you see a lot of people wanting to pull things out of DynamoDB?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of, you know, usage patterns where customers need to get some kind of information into DynamoDB as quickly as possible to serve it in low latency, but they then also want to do analytics on that data. And so, you know, this feature is really all about making it easier for customers to do analytics and less management of data pipelines. So focus on the outputs rather than, you know, getting the data from location A to B. So a really nice release.
Awesome. And just skipping through this real quick, because we want to get into your amazing insights for the question we have. Amazon Kinesis Data Firehose has been renamed to just Data Firehose. I normally really get annoyed at us changing our service names, but this one, in my opinion, makes a lot of sense, because I don't think I've really heard anyone really refer to Firehose as Kinesis Data Firehose. It always was either Data Firehose or Firehose itself. So I think this is a cool change and a step in a good direction to make those names a little bit more succinct. And the other one that I wanted to talk about, what I thought was quite interesting, was the ability to make it so when you are partitioning a data set within, or create prefixes in this case for S3 from Data Firehose, that you can choose a time zone. Now, this has been interesting because we've always been taught within our computer science and everything like that, that when you store a date, no matter where it is, it should always be stored in UTC.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting one. So if you actually think that you do have a use case for something like this, then definitely do like put that into chat, because I am quite interested on that. Now, I think we should skip along. I believe that was everything. Yes, it is. Back to you, Natalia.
Cool. Thank you very much, Casey and Rick. We just discussed about what's new in analytics and on AWS, and Rick started covering about trends. But can you probably talk to our audience about what emerging trends you see in the market and what our customers need to be aware of?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I guess we started talking a little bit earlier about data sharing, and I think that is worth just, you know, calling out as a trend, because it's something that a lot of our customers are thinking about and implementing. And the reason is, as we said earlier, that, you know, if there's more value to be captured out of models that have already been built, then data sharing is a really nice way to make that, or to enable that. And, you know, with the separation of storage and compute, that we see across the data ecosystem, it is a lot easier to implement those kinds of systems where you enable self-service. So data sharing and self-service are kind of, very related concepts in that, you need a data share to enable other end users to self-service. So I think that's something that we'll continue to see more of. Another thing that, I'm noticing more and more is a lot of customers are, I would say, moving more back into the SQL land versus, other frameworks in Python or Spark. And just to be clear, that's not to say that, everything's going back to SQL and now we don't need Spark, for example. But I think that as customers have been thinking, given the macro conditions that we find ourselves in, as customers have been thinking throughout 2023, what can I do to optimize the price performance of my platform? They're starting to go through and pick out various data pipelines and test that out on different engines. And in some cases, what they're finding is that certain types of logic can be expressed more simply in SQL. And they may have built that pipeline 5 years ago when, they had an on-premise SQL engine that simply couldn't handle their volumes of data. And so they take the big data approach to building that out on cloud. And now I'm starting to see more of a trend back in the direction of SQL. Part of the reason for that is also just, skills availability, right? So generally we'll find it easier to locate resources with SQL skills versus other frameworks. So, that's another thing I'm seeing. And then, of course, generative AI, right? So, this is a really big topic at the moment, and it's a really exciting time to be seeing the technology evolve, but also just the way that customers are using it and the benefits they're getting out of it. So many use cases in that space, whether that's through, improving developer productivity with something like Code Whisperer, or, Q to improve in productivity for your organization, or conversational AI. So, like AI-powered contact centers, many different places we're seeing the technology be used, and a huge amount of value to be captured there by customers. So really exciting.
Yeah, sounds exciting. I think you already touched on some of challenges, like, for example, skills, but can you probably talk a little bit more about what are common challenges customers or businesses face when we come to data management and analytics?
Yeah, so you're right. So, in some cases, it could be skills. Upskilling to become familiar with new tool sets and new ways of doing things. But I would say that another challenge that I run into sometimes is that with the flexibility of the cloud, right, compared to, working in an on-premise system, when there was a problem to be solved, there was probably only 2 or 3 tools that you had access to, and you had to choose between them to decide how are we going to solve this problem. In the cloud, you have many different options. And so I think that sometimes, whilst that's a really great facet of the cloud, it means you can use the right tool for the job. Sometimes it actually can make it a little bit harder to get started as well. So take a migration scenario. We have this on-premise data platform, integrating 50 different sources together, for example, supporting dashboarding and reporting. Trying to pick that up and moving it into the cloud can be quite the task, of course, especially if you get yourself bogged down in design. So I think that, sometimes it's really important to just stay laser focused on the outcome that we're trying to achieve. That might mean starting with a single use case and saying, let's consider this an experiment. Let's understand what is a one-way door and what's a two-way door. Right? This is the other benefit of, doing data analytics and AI on cloud. We can change things over time. And so I think that, that is that kind of decision paralysis on what tools will we use and how will we design this when really there might be 3 right answers, and the best course of action would be to just get started and go and deliver that value, and then look at how you can optimize that later. So I'd say that's another challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And talking about challenges and, like you said, about business value, if you think about we build systems not just because you like to build systems, but to actually bring some business value. So businesses definitely have goals and some strategies. And do you know how we can make sure that business or their analytics any analytics initiative actually align with their strategy and their business goals? Do you have any suggestion for the customers?
Yeah, really, really good question. So I think that, fundamentally, the most important thing there is to make sure that whatever we're trying to do with data analytics, we understand what business goal that aligns to, right? And the best way to ensure that those 2 things stay in alignment is to work backwards from a business strategy, right? And so that means, getting all of the right people in the room, that's technology stakeholders, business stakeholders, and really talking about, what do we want to achieve in terms of business strategy? What are our goals? Now, it's usually going to be, it's going to be, we want to improve our revenue, or we want to reduce our cost structure, or maybe we want to reduce some kind of risk level. But it's about going down, into more detail on what exactly that strategy is, what are we trying to achieve, and only then starting to think about what data points can we use and what kind of analytics or AI techniques can we use to support and accelerate that objective. So if you're in, for example, an insurance company and your business strategy is to reduce operating costs, then your analytics initiatives are probably going to be around claims processing. So how can we automate that? Or how can we use AI in our contact centers to manage the cost structure there? And hopefully as a side benefit, improve customer experience too. But if your strategy is to cross-sell different products, then you're probably going to be looking at collecting different data points that will help inform your understanding of a customer's propensity to engage with that product. And so I think it's really, what that all comes back to is making sure that everybody, not just, those defining the strategy, but everybody in your analytics team, your business users, etc., everybody understands what it is that we're trying to achieve, and then aligns on that objective, agree what the use cases are, how they support the business strategy, and then work backwards from that. So I think that, it's, and it's a really good question, because it's very easy to skip over or to make assumptions about, well, this would be a good use case because, it makes sense and we've seen other people do it, but it may not actually be in alignment with the strategy of your business.
Yeah, definitely. I think you just touched on some examples, like, for example, insurance company, but can you probably provide a little bit more examples where customer actually successfully utilizing data analytics?
Yeah, sure. All right. One example that I really like, because I think it's a really good example of what we just spoke about. Working backwards from the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, right, from that value exchange. So one example that I think is a really good illustration of that is Domino's Pizzas. So Domino's are a pizza business, and they've got many stores spread out across Australia. And what Domino's realized was that the faster they could, well, let me go back a step. Domino's wanted to improve their customer experience. And, when you improve customer experience, that helps you retain customers, and there's, benefits there as well. But what they realized was that the faster they could deliver a pizza to a customer, the happier that customer would be, right? From survey results, satisfaction surveys, they realized that this is what actually makes our customers happy, and they're less likely to complain. They're more likely to say they're happy. And so so they ask themselves, how can we actually make that faster? How can we use data analytics or machine learning techniques to improve that customer experience? And so they experimented with a use case that would effectively make predictions about when a customer is likely to make an order and what will they order. Now, this isn't just a guess of, we think that Rick will order a pizza because it's 7 p.m. on Friday, but Rick's on our application. He's started adding a couple of things to his basket. We're watching what, actions he's taking, and we think that he's going to execute this pizza order, for a Hawaiian pizza. As soon as they believe that order is going to go through, the pizza will actually start being made. And what that enabled them to do in their experiments was actually achieve a delivery time of under 5 minutes averaged out over the course of an actual week, and improve their customer experience, right? So I just really like that story because it's really, it's not the most obvious use case that, that might just, or we're ordering, we do pizzas, so let's predict what people will order. But by working backwards from that signal on, we know customers are more happy when they get their pizza faster, and then they delivered that use case or defined that use case to support the outcome they wanted to achieve. So I think that's a really nice example of, following that process of working backwards from the outcome.
Yes, it definitely looks like this company actually used their strategy and align their analytics system with their strategy and their business goals, which is awesome to hear. Moving forward, I know, you probably know, and I know that, especially when we compare on-premises, as you touched before, there are obviously benefits of using cloud and AWS in particular, such as scalability and elasticity. What are the key considerations for businesses when it comes for scalability and elasticity in data analytics?
Yeah, so I think that, so scalability and elasticity, right? So, I think that depending on where a customer journey is starting, right, the answer can be different. So if I'm a customer who is already running I have extensive experience running an analytics ecosystem, on-premise, for example, then I'm going to have a good understanding of what kind of scalability metrics do I need to be able to meet, and at what times of the year or at what times of the month or week will I need to scale, right, to improve to increase the resources to serve my end users or use cases, right? And so if you know that, then you can kind of go into your architecture journey with a few clues on where you need to scale and to what extent you need to scale. But I think that if you're starting from a clean slate, and perhaps it's an entirely new use case, you say, well, we have this idea, we've got a use case we want to deliver on because it supports our business strategy and we think there's good value there. But we just want to get that outcome, and we want to move as quickly as possible without getting too bogged down in scaling policies and these kinds of things. I think that's where serverless becomes really important. And the tip that I generally give to my customers is that if you're just getting started, if you know that you're going to have some spiky development activities where you might run some workloads on a few days throughout the week and not other days, we don't really know what the consumption pattern looks like, serverless is a really great option. And I think that my kind of mental model for this, and this is probably because I'm from an electrical engineering background, is that you'll have some, if you kind of plot your computational resources over time, right, on a new use case, that's going to be transient. It's going to chop and change for quite some time until it finally settles. And so you have this operating envelope where there's waves, there's spikes, and on the weekend or 9 a.m., our computational requirements increase. But then what emerges is kind of like a steady state component of, we know that we always, need this amount of resource. And that's when you start looking into optimization. And that could be, there's many mechanisms for that, things like reserved instances. So, I think that the key here is maybe, just be careful that these kinds of things don't turn into an academic exercise of trying to architect everything perfectly and get every scaling policy right, when you might be able to just use a serverless resource to give you a really good idea of what your resource demand actually looks like over time.
Yeah, I think it's an awesome tip, because you can start quickly without overcomplicating it from the start. And once you figure out the pattern, you can optimize later on. I think it's a general suggestion we give to the customer and now about any cost optimization.
Definitely. Yeah.
One of the things which I don't think we touched today is data swarms. I know there is a big thing about data lakes, like houses, but there are terrible stories about data swarms. Do you have any suggestion or recommendation for the customers, what steps they can take to avoid that problem?
Yeah, look, I think that, when we talk about data swarms, what we're talking about is generally there's a data lake out there, right? So it's an object storage layer. There's lots of different objects in there. We don't actually really know what some of them are. The amount of storage consumed by our lake tends to increase over time, and maybe we don't really know why. And there could be a nervousness to remove objects because there could be a business use case hanging off it. And I think that really, there's some simple measures that you can put in place from the beginning to help avoid that scenario. And the first one is cataloging your assets that are in the data lake. So cataloging so that you have a repository you can go to understand what exactly is in our data lake. And if we find something that's not cataloged, you can go to, you could even go to the extent of setting up automated actions to, remove or put into a lower storage class items that are not cataloged and therefore, they're objects we don't understand the purpose of. But cataloging, having monitoring in place so that you can see, for example, what is our total, storage footprint, and is that increasing over time? If so, to what extent? And do we understand why that's happening? Is there a business reason for that to happen? So a lot of it is just, I guess, discipline and making sure that there's some guardrails. There's always a bit of a balancing act between, having too many guardrails such that it's difficult for people to innovate. But on the other hand of the spectrum is where you don't have enough guardrails at all, and you can end up with quite a messy environment. So that's one way to, I think, try and avoid that scenario of a sprawling data lake. Cataloging is really important, I think, because, and I guess while we're on it, it's probably worth calling out that there's technical data catalogs, right? So, this is AWS Glue. It'll provide location metadata about where your assets are in the data lake, what format are they, what are the fields, metadata, these kinds of things. That's useful. But then there's this concept of business data catalog, and that's something that we surface through Amazon Data Zone. And that's a more business user-friendly way of looking at the contents of your data lake and searching in business terms, etc. And in that business data catalog, you can do things like tag which use cases are actually leveraging this asset, right? So that for everything that's in the data lake, you also understand what it's being used for. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. No, thank you very much for these tips. I think it would be helpful for customers, especially who is just starting on their journey, to have these tips before kind of ended up with the data swarm and trying to figure out afterwards. Obviously, we want the data to work for ourselves. We don't want data just for sake of data. So that would be good to have data-driven insights, and to have it, especially for the business people who don't like numbers and tables. They probably want to have some kind of visualization. What are the best practices for data visualization to kind of make sure that you communicating that insights effectively with the business?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's one, single answer to this, but let me share my thoughts on it. I think that there's this mental model, at least that I internalize, when it comes to delivering value out of data, and that is that you have data on one end. You have data. With that data, you generate insights. Based on those insights, you take an action. It could be automated. It could be human assisted. That action needs to actually generate an outcome, right? Because the whole idea is to generate some outcome, and that will either, improve our revenue, reduce our cost, or our, risk, whatever it is that we're trying to achieve in our business strategy. When it comes to, the best way to visualize, I always think about how can I best present this insight to trigger the right action that will deliver the outcome, right? Now, that's, let me give you an example of that. When I was, this is, going back probably 5+ years, I was contracting for a customer. And one of the things that we did, we were building a data platform, and we had SLAs on the different outputs that had to be generated for reporting and insights. And we had built dashboards that monitor those SLAs, right? So that you could see, which job finished on time, which one's running late, which one's delayed. And we had that, hosted in a business intelligence application, and everyone had a link you could go and check out how are things going. But not much actually. So we didn't actually get those dashboards didn't achieve their objective. The whole objective of having these dashboards was that we want to meet our SLAs. We made 2 simple changes in that customer, and the first was we tied a performance metric to it, right? So people will actually be, people in the team who are responsible for these SLAs will actually be measured on these SLAs too. It's not just a dashboard that sits out there. We're now tying it to business processes and performance reviews and these kinds of things. The other thing we did was we bought a TV and we just projected that dashboard on the TV. The moment we did that, everything changed. Every time there was a single problem in any data pipeline, we had 3 people diving in there to fix it so that tomorrow we don't see that on the TV again. Simply by putting that or projecting that dashboard on a physical device in a room that everyone, no one can avoid it. When you walk in the office, you see it. It changed our behavior. And so those insights were always there, but what we were missing was the link from insight to us taking the right action to achieve the outcome. And so, a long way of answering your question, but what I'll come back to is the point that, visualization, or even more broadly, visualization is about getting to the right action based on the insight. You've got an insight, we need to take an action. And I think that when you understand what that action is, then it's easier to answer the question of where do we best place this insight, right? This visualization. Are we going to embed that in a web page somewhere? Are we going to have a push notification going out to somebody when an event happens? That's the way I kind of think about it.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very great example. I do like that, the TV part of it, because obviously just because you have dashboard doesn't mean people actually looking at it. So really, that TV is actually making people look, and yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And the last question I do have prepared for you is about data governance. Can you recommend something how businesses can establish effective data governance framework? Like, what do you see customers do in this space? Because it is, while it can be a little bit boring, but it's a very important topic.
Yeah, it is an important topic. So my views on, I've worked in data governance teams before, and the frustration that I felt when I worked in a data governance team was that I knew what best practice was. I knew that there's all these things that we could and should be doing to improve data quality, to make sure that I've got the thumbs up, to make sure that the information is accurate, that we have things cataloged properly, you know, that we're looking at, you know, permissioning, all these things. And what I've generally found, and you know, this just could be unique to me, but I find that a lot of people that work in the data governance space are very much perfectionists, as I was when I worked in the data governance space. And I think what becomes really important when it comes to data governance is actually understanding not just what are all the list of best practices that we can find, you know, in different papers out there, but what would actually move the needle for my organization, right? What are the most important dimensions of data governance? Because there are many dimensions. And then how can we deliver on those, right, to actually get some momentum and get the wheels turning? And so whilst, you know, I went on a quite an extensive kind of assessment journey, looking at different tool sets that we can use, basically trying to find a tool set that can solve every single one of the problems. But what I actually found was that, you know, one of the clear problems that the end users were calling out is that we don't have a place we can go to find definitions of different fields inside our environment. And we don't know if data's been loaded on time or not, right? And both of those problems, which were the key problems that were reported by the business, and the key reasons why they were saying we don't have, you know, adequate data governance, both of those problems were solved very, very simply, without having to, you know, deploy a brand new tool that, you know, that entertains each of the dimensions of data governance. A simple dashboard that had a traffic light system, green, amber, red, on is our data here on time, has it come late, and having a business data glossary that defines each of the fields and metrics that we store inside the environment. Doing those two things, which weren't hard, by the way, actually solved a lot of our problems. And so the point to that is, you know, I think it's good to, you know, to be ambitious. And yes, data governance is important, and it's something that, you know, all customers should be thinking about to some extent. But understand what data governance means inside your environment, and what are the key dimensions that are going to move the needle for you. You know, so if you have, for example, 3 different data sources, and those sources hop through 3 different systems in your data platform, might be, you know, that establishing data lineage would be a non-trivial task there. But and that, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying, is that as important as a catalog, for example? So I think that, you know, just I guess to round that out, when it comes to data governance, it is very important. It's a very important discipline and aspect of any analytics environment. I think it's also really important to understand which of those elements are the most important inside your organizational context. And a good way to find that out is by talking with your end users.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much, Rick. I found it's very insightful. And yes, definitely I don't think there is one solution fit all nowadays anywhere. And customer need to take into account their own system, their own business strategy, their own business goals, and what works for their business, what's not. Thank you very much for sharing all these, you know, insights, stories, examples, and best practices. And we have a little bit of time left, and I believe Casey has, welcome back, Casey, has a demo for us. Over to you, Casey. What the demo is about?
I do indeed have a bit of a demo just to actually make this, you know, have a little bit more of a technical aspect. We have been talking about a lot of higher level ideas. So I thought it'd be good just to, you know, how do you actually start putting this in practice? Because it does take a bit of momentum to get that, you know, oomph to overcome that inertia. That's the word I'm looking for. And I'm actually really sad, Rick, that I don't have your fancy camera thing that gives me the animations. And why I am just quickly doing things in the background. I have actually been talking with someone to chat about pizza because you apparently made them a little bit hungry. There, Rick, with your example. There we go. But yeah, I was also just talking about my personal dislike of fruit on pizza. Outside of tomato, but tomato's not a fruit in culinary terms. Yeah, don't get me started. Anyway, data framework, we got this. Okay. And Hut said yes, the pepperoni is by far my favorite. I am very easily distracted by food. I'm a food motivated person. Cool. So I was looking around for, a lot of our like examples and demos, and then I stumbled across this framework that has been put out. From my understanding, it was released or started being working on like last year around August 2003. I believe, Rick, you have had a cursory look over this as well. And I just thought this was a cool idea because this is something that I've thought about for ages. And I personally have had a concept that I've been working on around how do you make this simpler for the data engineer. And a lot of this is about breaking it down to components, as you can see on the screen. Sorry, I'm jumping back and forwards. But you can actually create high-level constructs and then configure them as needed. One of these examples is a EMR serverless application, which Rick did mention before, which is quite interesting because we now have Glue, which you can write custom scripts for, and we also have EMR serverless, and they're both abstractions of essentially the same platform. So now you get into that playground of having multiple services that do roughly the same thing, but they have that slight different audience and use cases. And there's also the governance layer, which Rick was talking to around data catalog and data lake. The data lake one is pretty cool because they will automatically start setting up your lake formation and all of those layers as well. Now, what does that look like? So I am building out the example. So this is what the example looks like. It does the whole entire code pipeline. And then that will deploy into a staging and production account. I am naughty because this is an example. So both of those are actually in the same account, but just different regions. Do as I say, don't do as I do in this case. Now, what does that look like? So I've essentially pulled this solution down into a Cloud9 environment and started just picking it apart. So here you can see this application. And it is right now, the very first thing it is building out the CI/CD pipeline, which is there to actually essentially wrap the repo. And then whenever you do a push to that repo, it will go through this pipeline and then push out to your two environments, which is pretty standard for your like CI/CD. And you can see here, it will be doing that application stack. And all this is doing is really creating a bunch of data lake catalogs. So it's creating a data lake catalog, creating a data lake storage, creating your EMR serverless runtimes. And you can see that there's a bunch of configurations going on here. The key one is that it's passing in as a job this Python script, and this Python script is just a very simple script. So the data that this example is running off is New York taxi data that has been just manipulated to fit this example, and this will work out the average distance, or not the average distance, the distance that a trip was, and then calculate how many times that distance was within that data set. You'll understand that a little bit more once I show you the two data sets. So I have done that, I deployed it, I pushed it, and then that has gone into another lovely account, which is this one here. And this is where I mentioned before, it has built out a bronze, silver, and gold data lake structure. So bronze is where you normally put all of your raw, unfiltered, unvalidated data sets into. Silver is where you've done a bit of validation and cleanup on it, and gold is really your curated data set. Oh yes, I should zoom in. Let me go back to just make sure in the future. Yeah. Okay, how do I zoom in? Rick, can you say this one? How do you zoom in on the old Cloud9? Do I have to do it for the browser? Yes, I have to do it for the browser. I'm so used to just being able to natively do the control and scroll wheel. So this is what this the script that runs on the EMR serverless cluster looks like. It's just getting the two source locations, getting the aggregate trip distance, and then committing that. If you have any questions, by the way, do feel free to ask them. I am giving a very broad general overview. So if you have anything that is in particular, and I also will increase the zoom for this screen as well, just so you can read. As mostly everything's here. Okay, so you got this, and this is in lake formation. So it's already started building up your lake formations, what means that by default, that you will have a layer of your data lake permissions already been built, where at this one, because there's been no configuration, all the permissions are pretty much allow everyone to do everything, which you generally won't have this at big organizations, but I have seen a lot of the approaches within smaller organizations to be this, unless there's HR data or something in it. Going through, so as part of the script, what it does, oh, do I have to do this for every single window? Okay, mental note, fix that for next time. And just like this is, so what the demo does is that it will upload all of these parquets into the silver bucket to then be processed. So what this file is, if we just use the handy dandy S3 select, is just a bunch of data that says, this is the timestamps and the text and the information on like the object or entity, which is pretty like, basic raw data. Where now if we look at what is actually in the gold data set, this one actually did do it. So I'm just querying the gold data set here. So you can see I'm just selecting all from the Spark Gold data set. And you can see here that it has taken all of those raw data points I showed before, calculated trip distance. So this is 0.22 miles. I'm fairly sure it's doing it in miles. And that is apparently by far the most common, oh no, it's actually not. 5.5 miles is for the yellow taxi. So it's applying that extra layer, and actually have provisioned all of this for you. So for me to provision this, it took roughly 25 minutes for it to set up all of the CI/CD pipeline infrastructure and all of the and then deploy that all into these staging production accounts. So like infrastructure as code does make this very simple and very repeatable. And here you can see it has set up the serverless job. And down to the bottom right, actually, I would have to zoom in twice. And one of the cool things about serverless is that if you click this little thing here, my other screen's in the way, it will tell you how much utilization that script used on your cluster and what is the billable hours for that resource. Does anyone have any questions before I go off the rails into something else a little bit? Otherwise, I will continue on with my lovely. Awesome.
No, doesn't look like it.
I must be too good at doing my presentations. Oh, that's the one I am missing. Yes, the glue catalog here. So because it is in Lake formation, sorry, is backed up by the glue catalog here as well, which is, and based, oh, there's no schemas. Should be schemas.
Like demo. Yay.
This is why I can't have nice things. Whenever I try to show off one individual thing, it's like, nah, demo says no. Oh, man. Oh, well. So we'll go back to this code here, and we'll go into, and you can see that it's broken down into pretty simple steps. And it's not a lot of code here. A lot of this code has been abstracted by the underlying framework. And once again, that framework is this data solutions framework. So if you're interested in it, I'll post a link here. And by the sounds of it, there is no question. So we will leave it there. Over to you, Natalia.
Cool. Thank you very much, Casey. One last thing I want to ask, do you have QR code for our survey?
No, because that would be way too helpful. I do have a link to the survey though.
Yes, can you post a link in the chat, please?
I can indeed. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
No worries. Thank you, Casey. All right, folks. That will be all for today. I want to thank every one of you for hanging out with us today. Whether you hear from the start or just join, we really appreciate your support. And please fill in survey, which Casey posts in the chat. We are a data-driven company. We always want to make sure we are improving things for our customers, our audience, our community. So yes, please fill in surveys and stay tuned for the next show. It's actually going to be on 27th of March at 2 p.m. New Zealand time. And we're going to cover a topic of laying strong cloud foundations. And until then, please stay safe, stay awesome, and have a nice day. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.